Our next speaker, Barnaby Oswald, and moderated by Paul Plant. Barnaby is a managing director and co-founder of the Local Data Company. And I think everybody knows Paul from Radical Consulting. I'd like to invite you two up. We're going to talk about retail.
You can shop, you can save, having the time of your life.
First time I've ever stood up to ABBA music. This next session probably kind of really gets to the heart of what this whole event is really about the convergence of the old world and the new world, and specifically what the impact of digital commerce is having on the traditional high street. Here in the UK, probably no other business has more granular data on what impacts are going on the UK high street. Barney's company does an audit of pretty much every high street and retail park in the UK every 6 months, and so there's probably no better person than him to take it over. So I'd like to hand over to the founder and CEO of the Local Data Company, Barney Oswald.
Thanks, Paul. Hi. So as Paul said, I'm the founder of the Local Data Company, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the profound shifts we've seen on the high street, and one of the driving factors has been technology over the past few years. A quick look at the picture we see today. So consumer behaviour is increasingly erratic. That includes footfall. How we behave is changing the whole time. The number of places you can visit as a customer are fast increasing, and the performance variation between each centre is increasing all the time. So to bring that to life, there's a seaside town called Margate in the UK, down in Kent. They're trying to massively address the issues they face as a town centre, and the issue they face is that 1 in 3 of their shops is vacant. So you imagine visiting a place where every third shop you pass is vacant. It's a pretty depressing affair, and how you bring a town back to life from that is incredibly difficult. The competition amongst all these centres is huge. As I say, between the places and the retailers, the competition is fierce out there for these retailers. And the relationship between clicks and bricks, it's incredibly complex, and it's fast changing. So it's very difficult for these retailers to keep up. And all this leads to putting their profitability under pressure. The costs are fast increasing. It could be a new minimum wage. There are huge costs implied in using all this technology and bringing it to bear. So before I tell you about some of the insights I'm going to share with you, I just want to bring some credibility to the insights I'm going to share and tell you how we've collected them. Our company is very much in the business of evidence-based insights, and I'm just going to share with you how we do that. So, as Paul said, we track 500,000 shops across the UK, and that's across 7,000 locations. And how do we do that? Well, we take the most analogue data collection methodology possible. We've got 40 people across the country, and they physically visit each store. So they walk into each town, they've got a list of stores they've got to visit, and we're updating that, as Paul said, every 6 months. And that's driving all the insights I'm going to share. It's painstaking, it's expensive. You'd think in this age there'd be a digital way of doing it. There isn't. This is the only way to track, at a premises level, what is happening across the UK. And we've got 8 years of data of doing this. So let's have a look at the environment these retailers are operating in. Inflation's flatlining. Now, that's important to a retailer. Arguably, it's deflationary for retailers. That just makes the problem even more difficult if your prices are constantly being driven down. And while confidence is up, it's very shaky. It could be low wage inflation, job insecurity, Brexit. There's always a reason for people to feel quite insecure. And that all plays into the pot for these retailers. So let's look at some of the changes that we're seeing. Vacancy rates spiked massively during the recession, and they're now coming down. But there's still 50,000 vacant shops across the country. That's a massive problem that this country faces, what to do with those stores. And not only are there 50,000 vacant, it's not a churn issue. 40% of those stores have been vacant for more than 3 years. So they're structurally ineffective. They're no longer fit for purpose. And there are winners and losers. So it turns out the big centres fare badly. They're the ones with the highest vacancy rates. There are many reasons around that, but it's quite difficult to execute. Traffic, parking, competition is fierce. The smaller centres, where there's a real focus around convenience and a really defined offer, they're doing much better. So you think of your local market town, it's doing a lot better. And it varies by type. So whilst the town centres struggle, shopping centres do much better. That's because they own the environment. They can curate an experience. You know, when we go to shopping centres, it kind of tends to be a day out, and that's what they can build for you. And then the retail parks do the best, and that's because there's ample parking. They can put their full range in because it's a big box format, and they can do the click and collect in a really efficient way. So if the essence of retail is theatre, the killer question for me is, you've got this gap of these 18 to 34-year-olds who are very active online, and arguably the beginning of that is your digital natives. As they move through this chart, they move towards their 50s. Are they going to behave like people do currently at 50, or are they going to still massively shop online? Because that's going to have a profound impact on profitability of stores and our high streets. You know, that vacancy rate could easily go flying back up, and we're very sociable animals, so we like to engage on those high streets, but they need to be more and more about experience and less probably about product. So let's have a look at some of the changes that are happening. We see about 10% of businesses open and close across high streets in the UK each year. So that's about 45,000. But it's not uniform. So your comparison goods, that's your fashion, electrical, etc., that's in decline. That's the kind of piece that's moving online. Your convenience is growing because big shift happened over the last few years, and since the recession we no longer do that big once a week shop at the supermarkets. We now actually try and shop every couple of days, and we live at a very different lifestyle. Leisure is where all the growth is happening. So high streets are now about having restaurants, coffee shops, bars, etc. And you can see this some of the big fascias over the last 12 months. Poundland, Card Factory, really good examples. They are not transactional online. That's not where they play. They're very much about convenience, and they're about low cost. And then if you look at the declining side, you've got, for example, recruitment there, which is massively shifting online, and recruitment barely exists on the high street anymore. And then if we look at some of the growth, tobacconists, an interesting one, that's actually driven by e-cigarettes. So that's kind of replacing one poison with another. But if you look at the other, you're looking at the likes of barbers, you're looking at health, that's a huge part now for us, and you're looking at convenience. And if you're looking at the fallers, for example, you've got your car and van hire, that's actually to do with things like Zipcar massively changing how we use and borrow cars. Clothing, moving online. Newsagents, classic one, that's just digital. That is, we now consume our media on our iPads. We don't go and buy a newspaper anymore. Pubs, we don't sort of tend to use pubs like we used to in this country. We now tend to use the coffee shops in between meetings, etc. And banks, massive shift. And I'll come on to a slide in a minute, but that's obviously massively moving online. So if we look at some of those longer term trends, so if we look at banking, you're looking at nearly 20% have closed up in the last 5 years. So they used to be a kind of mainstay of a high street, and they're just massively shifting online. There's an old adage now that the busiest Lloyds branch is the 7:05 train from Basingstoke to London on a Monday morning. We don't go into the banks, but Stefan's earlier point, when you've got businesses in towns, they need to deposit their cash. The bank's disappearing, so cash is obviously going to disappear as well. The whole shift is obviously digital there. Video libraries, there used to be one on every high street. I remember my youth, many a weekend spent churning through the video library. They've disappeared. There are now less than 50. There were over 1,000 5 or 6 years ago. So you're seeing massive change through this digital transformation. And if we look at some of the rises, the coffee shops, if we look at how we all do our meetings, so many are now conducted in the coffee shops. Charity shops is perhaps unique to this country, but that's based on if a store's vacant, the person that owns it still pays all the taxes. And if they put the charity shop in there, the taxes go away and neither party pay them. So essentially, that's just a proxy for a vacant shop. But you're looking at sort of hair and beauty, health and beauty is kind of where the growth is coming from, and leisure and services. And this is sort of some trends of the last 3 years, just making the point again. Big growth in things like experience like nail salons, beauty salons, etc. That's where a lot of the growth is coming from. And a shift in our hobbies as well. So we're moving away from the likes of a snooker hall and bingo, gone online, arguably bingo, and we've seen the rise of things like betting. Betting's an interesting one. That used to be off the high street, a slightly dodgy little affair that you'd go downstairs and do. But with digital, betting's become so much more mainstream now, and actually you've seen a lot of the betting shops move onto the main high street. So arguably digital has perhaps changed how we perceive the whole betting industry. But the high streets in this country, they're on a kind of knife edge. It's very small, the gap between growth and decline on our high streets. It doesn't take much just to shift it either way, most likely down, and you're going to see some profound changes. And you can see the blue line is all the chains. They're moving off the high street. And it used to be said that to be national coverage in this country, you'd probably have 500 to 600 stores. Arguably now, with a really good transactional website, you're looking at 100. And the one we all cite as an example is John Lewis. John Lewis in this country is a massively successful retailer. They have 34 stores. That's all they've got. And they're a massive nationwide retailer who've just executed online brilliantly. So just to recap, it is complex. Competition is fierce, it's fast changing, it's incredibly difficult for these guys. So a lot of you have got digital services for these retailers. You've got to understand the context you're offering them in, the challenges they face, and how difficult it is for them to operate. So that's your short history of the high street. Thank you very much.
Pretty fascinating. I'm sure we've probably got a few questions in the room for Barnaby. Certainly got time for questions. Anyone want to make any points? I have one, and we saw a trend a few years back of people moving out of town to do their shopping at the big off-site retail park. What are the trends there as opposed to the high street?
So the shift that one change they're trying to do there is bring some leisure onto those retail parks. So it's meant to be about an experience in theatre now, shopping. So if you're going to the retail park, just there being 4 big retailers isn't quite sufficient. They're now trying to engender that opportunity for a coffee, something to drink, something to eat. But it's still, you look at investment, where people are buying these assets, retail parks is where most of the activity is. Prices have gone through the roof, yields are down to a fractional amount because so many people have pushed their money into that sector.
And one of the other trends we're starting to see is people like Amazon putting their click and collect places back on the high street.
Yeah. And I
don't know if you're seeing that in other parts of Europe or other parts of the world, but
yeah, and you're seeing quite a few online players starting to move onto the high street, which is an interesting trend. Is they start out purely online and they're now doing the reverse and actually considering moving onto the high street. So yeah, there's some interesting shifts there as well.
So you buy online and then go to the high street to pick it up?
Yeah.
Weird. Things go full circle. Any questions? Anyone with any questions? We have one in the middle of the room. Let's try and get a... Oh yeah, Stephanie's coming with a mic.
Hi Barnett, have you got any vision on what in the UK big retailers are doing to attract these people that look online and then go into their shops? Is there anybody doing anything really great around, I'm tracking you as a person, I can see that you visited my site 5 times to look at an iPad in the last week, let me send you an incentive to actually come in and buy it. Is there anybody doing anything like
There's
that?
definitely some businesses working around that, and the whole click and collect piece is very interesting because people that order online and go and collect in the store, there are incredible numbers. John Lewis put out some really interesting numbers about the percentage extra they spend when they get in the store. So driving them in there as part of that click and collect is actually much more valuable to them than just doing the online transaction. So yeah, there are people trying to trace that journey by tracing all the MAC IDs, but I mean it's complicated, and it's made more complicated by how they allocate a lot of those costs and those revenues. So if you order online, it gets delivered to home and you take it back to the store, where does all that get credited? Did the store just take a negative number against it, and online, which is what they're all trying to report to the city, is doing brilliantly? There's some really interesting data around that.
And interestingly enough, Marks and Spencer are trying to do similar things, and one of the heads of digital at M&S just happened to be previous head of digital at John Lewis, which is quite interesting. Anyone else? Any further questions? Well, otherwise, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Barnaby. Sorry, there's a question behind one of these middle pillars.
Just to say, do you think the attack on driving more generally, like congestion charges, parking charges, etc., is that really having an impact against the high street compared to retail parks and other areas?
Yeah, it just doesn't help. It just adds to the problem that they face. You're absolutely spot on. You know, all those issues. It's like town centres that the councils are trying to get more money out of the parking charges, and it's just self-defeating. Then the stores don't get any visitors, and so they're all going to go bust. I mean, yeah.
Is it a balancing act between the council getting it off the business rates or the council getting it off?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're robbing Paul to pay. Yeah,
is that how it works out?
I don't know what the exact numbers are there, but yeah, I think it's been proven that the parking charges is a false economy and really is clever.
Well, it's definitely a view here in London. There was a move here in London 2 or 3 years back to extend the congestion charging zone that actually got defeated because of the lobby of local retailers. Because for those of you who don't know, we have congestion charging here in London. You have to pay £14.50 just to drive your car into that part of London, which is pretty much the West End. And then once you get there, you then have to pay something like £8 an hour to park your car. So you can understand why the retail lobby was pretty strong in stopping the congestion zone being extended. I think we have another question here on the aisle. Stephanie, right next to you.
Oliver Rothschild. I'm sorry to tell you that there's now a movement that the whole of the congestion charge now should embody the M25 area. Again, following on from that question with retail, I'm always interested to see how retail is going to be able to increase its, or not necessarily increase its footfall, but stop the actual take from going down. And I make the analogy, and I wonder if that's something you're thinking about, is the cinema trade went down, but the cinemas had to reinvent themselves to be able to get the spend per head much higher by doing food and entertainment, things like that. Do you see that part of the retail having to do that, not necessarily increase the footfall or stop the decrease, but to make the shopping experience totally different from what we see it now?
Exactly. It's about the experience now. The successful ones, it's all about the theatre and the experience of when you're in store. So yeah, they do need to, a lot of them, reinvent themselves. Some are very good at it. John Lewis is always cited as a great example, and yeah, some of them got a lot of catching up to do.
Well, I think that's a lesson for all of us. All businesses have to ultimately reinvent or die. And so anyway, with that, Barney, thanks for... I know a few of you were scribbling down notes, but as Kim has already said, the slide small sessions are available after the event. So anyway, a big thanks to Barnaby. Thank you.